Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Oh, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'd like to start by putting on record my respect and my admiration for every single doctor, nurse, clinician and staff member at both St Helier and St George's Hospital for their outstanding service and dedication to the health and welfare of my constituents. These remarkable individuals go above and beyond despite facing such extraordinary testing circumstances, with 9 years of austerity leaving our treasured NHS desperately short of staff, services and supplies. And that yet the biggest threat for my constituents to our local hospitals is found far closer to home. For it's in the wild west of South West London NHS who are once again pursuing desperate attempts to close all acute services, including the major A&E and the consultant-led maternity unit at St Helier Hospital. The impact this would have on St George's Hospital, I believe, would be devastating. In this evening's debate, I'd like to outline the reality behind the latest threat to St Helier, branded Improving Healthcare Together 2020-2030. I'd like to challenge every foundation that this programme has been built upon, and I'd like to appeal to the Minister to step in before we see the decomposition of vital health services for my constituents in Mitcham and Morden. But first, I'd like to start with some history. Over almost 2 decades, the NHS in South West London has pursued several irresponsible attempts to close the acute health services at St Helier Hospital on the border of my constituency and move the services to leafy, wealthy Belmont in Sutton. Under different titles and brands, and under the guise of countless NHS-funded marketing consultants, the proposal is on repeat, with an estimated £50 million now wasted on almost identical consultations and programmes. Each one starts afresh, portraying to the public a neutral outlook when deciding where acute health services should be placed across South West London. The Minister may remember back in 2015 when secret proposals to close St Helier and build a new super hospital in Sutton were overheard by a BBC reporter on a train, bringing those plans to an embarrassing end. Fast forward to 2017 and the programme was repeated, this time titled Epsom and St Helier 2020-2030. And once again professing to assess the pros and cons of where to base acute health services. The public support issued by Chief Executive Daniel Elkeles, the man running the programme, to remove the services to Sutton, somewhat clouded the neutrality of the process.
Lady not agree, I'm grateful for her giving way. Would the Honourable Lady not agree with me that actually the immediately previous proposal actually talked about closing facilities at St Helier and moving them to St George's and Tooting, which was universally unpopular, whereas this current proposal that's on the table that I certainly want to get towards a public consultant talks about one of 3 sites, including relocating a new facility at St Helier Hospital.
Mr Deputy Speaker, my recollection of that particular consultation was that was really the scorched earth strategy of deciding that St Helier and Epsom were going to close and St George's would take the strain. I thank God that that never happened, because we could be in an extraordinarily difficult position had that ever happened. I may sound cynical when I talk about the NHS and their bias against my constituency and against services being on St Helier Hospital, but I have been here several times before. A Freedom of Information request revealed that those running the programme only distributed consultation documents to targeted areas around their preferred site and to just a handful of roads in my constituency. But my constituents care passionately about their local health services, and they will not be ignored, with 6,000 local residents responding to the programme by calling for St Helier to retain all of its services on its current site. Of course.
Thank you for giving way, and I did seek her permission beforehand because anything to do with health, I'm always very interested. I'm here to support the Honourable Lady as well. To centralise the health service means that ill, vulnerable and pregnant women are expected to travel for miles to get medical assistance is totally absurd. Surely it always has to be the health of the patient first and foremost.
With the honourable gentleman, but it also has to do not just distance travelled, but who is travelling that distance. Do they have access to a car? Do they have public transport? The NHS constitution requires that they take into account equalities legislation, that they particularly look at disadvantaged people who are in poor health and how they access services, because they access services differently. As I said, my constituents care passionately about the local health services, and when they responded to the consultation, 6,000 of them sent in cards explaining how they felt and how they wanted St Helier to retain all of its services on its current site. Can you imagine the anger when I found out that the responses had been discounted by the programme? Why? Because they were not on the official documentation, the same documentation that had been disseminated in those targeted letterboxes far away from my constituency. To the public, the Trust portrayed a neutral stance whereby a suitable site would be selected across South West London for their acute services. To the stakeholders in Belmont, they confessed their desire to move the services to their wealthy area. And to mine, they pretended that the consultation would genuinely seek the views of the public. But as my mum always says, much gets more. I'd like to put on record that while I fundamentally disagree with the desire to want to take services away from my constituents, I do recognise that Mr Elkaler's hard work and dedication in leading St Helier Hospital. Fast forward to the present day and the latest brand of Improving Healthcare Together 2020-2030, a programme that is built upon the unstable and unscrupulous foundation of its predecessors, and that once again considers the pros and cons of moving St Helier Hospital's acute services 7 miles away, west to Epsom or south to Leafy Belmont in Sutton. The programme was launched last summer. They always choose the summer, Mr Deputy Speaker, undertaking an initial public engagement that is expected to transition to a public consultation this coming summer. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, just 837 people responded to the public engagement, and that's including hundreds of NHS staff and 169 comments on Twitter or Facebook. That is an utterly abysmal response, considering the £2.2 million of taxpayers' money squandered on the programme already. Does the Minister agree with me that it's a complete misuse of taxpayers' funds at a time when our NHS is under such overwhelming pressure? But this is about more than just the future of St Helier Hospital, because if St Helier Hospital were to lose its acute services, my constituents tell me that they will not turn to Epsom or Sutton, but east to Croydon University Hospital or north to St George's. This is a completely terrifying prospect. Before my Christmas, my constituent Marion was left queuing outside St George's Hospital with her left leg badly infected because the A&E was full. And that was the calm before the storm, with St George's A&E facing its busiest ever week just a fortnight ago. We all remember the winter crisis last year, but the first full week of February this year was 16% higher than last year's equivalent, with a simply staggering 600+ visits every single day. And this is a hospital that already relies on St Helier as its safety valve. The maternity unit at St George's had to temporarily close both in 2014 and 2015, directing women already in labour to St Helier Hospital. That's why a letter sent in November from the chair of St George's Trust to those running the programme is completely astonishing. In the letter, the Chair expresses her concern, and I quote, that there is no formal requirement to take account of the impact on other providers when deciding where to relocate acute health services across South West London. It's hard to put into words just how dangerous that disregard is. I'd like to pause briefly to thank the Chief Executive of St George's Hospital, Jacqueline Totterdall, for her hard work and her tenacity in steering one of London's largest hospitals at a time of such difficulty. Because St George's is a hospital under already immense pressure. The plumbing, ventilation and drainage facilities are at breaking point, leading to a bid for £34 million of emergency capital from the Treasury. Does the Minister agree with me that a recent outflow of sewage in a hospital A&E is a clear sign that such emergency funding is justified and, more importantly, urgent? How busy does the Minister think the same A&E will be if the local NHS gets their way and moves St Helier's major A&E to wealthy, leafy Belmont? And will she step in today and require that any proposal to reconfigure health services wholeheartedly takes into account the impact that such a decision would have on all other nearby health providers? Merton Council recognise the devastating impact these proposals could have, and I'd like to put on record my thanks to the leader of Merton Council, Stephen Allen Brittas, the Cabinet Member for Social Care, Tobin Byers, and Ms Hannah Doody, Director of Community and Housing, for their unflinching support. It is so disappointing that those at Sutton Council can so idly stand by. By law, when deciding where acute services should be based across a catchment area of this size, it is fundamental that the level of deprivation and local health needs are acutely understood and thoroughly assessed. And so I read from cover to cover the deprivation and equality analysis produced by a range of external consultancy services as part of their £1.5 million programme fee. At a time when the NHS is so strapped for cash, it's extraordinary that my local NHS seemed to have carte blanche to employ so many consultants on such extraordinary rates. But even I was absolutely astounded by the monumental gaps in the analysis that these consultants have delivered. In the pieces of analysis on deprivation and equality, areas that rely on St Helier Hospital are either absent from the documents or are actively described as falling outside the catchment area. Take Pollard's Hill in my constituency, an area that would be considered deprived in comparison with much of Sutton or Epsom. Wideway Medical Centre is the largest GP surgery here and directs 34% of its patients to St Helier Hospital. But Pollard's Hill is deemed outside St Helier's catchment area. Why does this matter? Because if areas that rely on St Helier Hospital are not even considered in the analysis, how can the potential impact of moving acute services from the hospital be adequately assessed? And Pollard's Hill is not alone. There is no mention in the report of Lavender Fields, despite almost a fifth of Collier's Wood surgery patients and Mitcham family practice patients being directed or referred to St Helier from this ward. Now, of course, I urgently brought the gaps in analysis to the attention of those operating this programme and to the attention of Jane Cummings, Chief Nurse of the NHS. I was pleased that everyone agreed that such significant analysis shortfalls would be addressed and rectified.
For the Honourable Lady being very generous in giving way, would you not agree with me that Collier's Wood is pretty well smack bang next to St George's, and that the proposals that the public engagement was based on last year was that 85% of current patients would still be treated in their current hospital, whether it's St Helier, the new Sutton proposal, or Epsom Hospital?
There's no reason why the honourable member should know, so I'm not trying to be tricky in any way. But Collier's Wood Surgery is the title of a split-site GP surgery, one of which is based in the heart of Lavender Avenue on Western Road, which he probably does know very well, probably drives up and down it a lot, in the heart of one of the most deprived areas in my constituency. And it's where so many people go to St Helier Hospital. And the idea that you can remove an A&E and a maternity unit and keep what's left is a complete nonsense, because all the testing, all the blood testing facilities, the other tests, all the talented doctors and nurses simply don't stay there. They go. And Chase Farm, in my right honourable friend's constituency of Enfield North, is a wonderful example of that members may want to have a look at. So I'd raise the issues that the areas in my constituency and the very large surgeries had not been included, and I was promised that they would. But months have since passed and the process has proceeded unscathed, with no indication of when such significant gaps will be remedied. The icing on the cake in December, when 3 behind closed doors workshops were run by the programme on the grounds of this deficient evidence, they were designated, I quote, to inform the governing body's decision-making process about how the community and professionals ranked each of the 3 potential sites for acute hospital services. Let me be clear. Hand-picked professionals and members of the public used incomplete evidence to rank Sutton as the preferred site for acute services. Now, the Minister won't be surprised to hear that more participants in the workshop were from Sutton than Merton or Epsom. How can a fair, balanced and rounded opinion be accrued from workshops based on flawed evidence with disputable criteria and participated by an unrepresentative group of people? For these findings to be used in any capacity in the decision-making process would be completely unacceptable. Of course, I understand figures and analysis can always be skewed in one direction or another. If you want to disguise the 76.5-year life expectancy of men in Mitcham West in my constituency, then you include the 84.4-year average in Wimbledon Park and classify your figures by the borough of Merton as a whole. You count cancer rates, stroke rates, mortality rates by borough rather than by ward or lower super output area. You ignore deprived areas of the catchment and proceed full steam ahead with your programme. When will all the gaps in the analysis be completed? When will taxpayers' money stop being splurged on flawed and biased consultations? And when will the madness end? Because here's the reality. Within a mile of St Helier, there are over twice as many people with bad or very bad health compared to those living within a mile of the Sutton site, and almost 4 times the number within a mile of Epsom. Around St Helier, the local population is significantly larger, with considerably more dependent children and more elderly people. Furthermore, the local population to St Helier is far more reliant on public transport, with residents statistically less likely to have access to a car. And despite all of this, when I secured, and I can hardly believe it myself, £267 million from the Department of Health and the Treasury under both the Labour government and the coalition government to rebuild St Helier Hospital, guess what happened? The local NHS sent the money back. Can the Minister confirm whether they will again receive their funding this time round? It's time for some accountability and for the government to step in before even more money is wasted and the future of both St Helier and St George's is thrown into jeopardy. Leave these vital services where they are most needed at St Helier Hospital on its current site.
Caroline.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'd like to start by congratulating the Honourable Member for Mitcham and Morden on securing this incredibly important debate on the future of St Helier and St George's hospitals. I'd like to thank her for her continuing interest over what appears to be a period of many years in healthcare services in South West London, and she's been a incredibly passionate and highly motivated and I would say extremely effective advocate for the interests of her constituents, and I'm sure a lot of the points that she's made today, Mr Deputy Speaker, will be heard beyond these four walls. She's rightly concerned about the future of services at St Helier Hospital, which is run by Epsom and St Helier University Hospitals NHS Trust, and in particular the future of its A&E service. She's absolutely right that the organisation of acute services in South West London does appear to have been discussed for a number of years. In the interest of time, I won't set out the timescales and all the different things that seem to have occurred over this period, but she's already articulated it quite well anyway. In June 2018, Mr Deputy Speaker, the CCGs published an issues paper which outlined the challenges faced by local healthcare system and the four key local aims, which were 1, improving the health of the population, 2, delivering care as close to patients' home as possible, 3, ensuring high standards of healthcare across all providers, and 4, maintaining the provision of major acute services within their combined geographies. And the issues paper set out a provisional shortlist with 3 potential options for acute care, which you'll be aware of: locating major acute services at Epsom Hospital and continuing to provide all district services at both Epsom and St Helier Hospital, or locating major acute services at St Helier Hospital and continuing to provide all district hospital services at both Epsom and St Helier Hospital, or locating major acute services at Sutton Hospital and continuing to provide all district services at both Epsom and St Helier Hospitals. The CCG invited comments and suggestions from local stakeholders over a period of 3 months, and the CCGs have stressed that these proposals don't involve closing any hospitals. At this stage, they say that they don't have a preferred local proposal. I understand they are continuing to work with local partners to further develop these proposals, which will include full options appraisal and an impact assessment, and the development of a pre-consultation business case, which of course will have to undergo NHS England assurance, and I'm sure she will make her thoughts known to NHS England about this. Of course.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Would she not agree with me that one thing that a lot of people in Sutton and indeed Merton don't really respect, because St Helier is such an old hospital, is the benefit of actually having a possibly up to £400 million brand new facility, and the benefits that themselves will bring, no matter where it's located?
Well, my honourable friend makes an excellent point, and I think this is clearly, and that's why it's really important that these significant changes aren't made without a consultation, so local people's views can be taken into consideration. And something like a new hospital or changes to the configuration of acute services, the CCG will need to fully consult with the public before making any decisions, but clearly investment in any form is very welcome. And of course,
lists of capital NHS capital programmes in London have appeared in various newspapers, with Imperial Healthcare Trust at the top of those lists, Charing Cross, and other hospitals in that group. St George's is desperate. The sewage came through their sinks, their toilets, in their A&E only a few weeks ago. They're not sure whether the electric's going down, whether the plumbing, the water system has caused considerable health problems to patients. Who's getting the money? And is it all going to South London? Because it certainly would have to all go to South London if there's going to be a brand new hospital anywhere.
Well, she asks an excellent question. What I do know is that the CCGs are working closely with NHS England and NHS to develop the programme's capital scheme prior to the next spending review, with a view to NHS E&I presenting this scheme for funding. And they currently expect the public consultation on proposals that they're talking about not to take place until after the next round of capital bids is concluded, which is likely to be after the autumn. And of course, she's spoken about travel times, and there is a duty to do a travel times analysis when developing proposals, and that will be included in the consultation. And they also have duties, CCGs have duties to reduce inequalities as well. She spoke a lot about the inequalities in her area, and so they need to do impact analysis on that too. I understand that the Honourable Lady is also concerned that any potential changes could increase pressure on St George's Hospital, and she's absolutely right to raise this important point. The Department's very clear that NHS England and local NHS organisations must think about potential impacts on other services, which is why we're developing a more strongly regional approach to design NHS services. And CCGs must consider the impact on neighbouring hospitals that are close to the CCG boundary, such as St George's. Changes to accident and emergency services at any one hospital potentially impact a number of surrounding hospitals. So the 3 CCGs have to engage with neighbours throughout this process. And in addition, the neighbouring CCG can respond to any public consultation, and their response must be taken into account. With regard to the next steps, the Honourable Member will be aware the reconfiguration of services is a matter for NHS England and local NHS bodies. They have to be addressed at a local level rather than in Whitehall, because any local organisations understand the needs of their community. But no changes to the services people currently receive can be made without formal public consultation. They have to have support from GP commissioners. They have to demonstrate strengthened public and patient engagement, clear clinical evidence base. They must be consistent with the principle of patient choice. And the NHS England test on the future use of beds requires them to assure NHS England that the proposed reduction is sustainable over the longer term. The Department's very clear throughout the service change process that local NHS organisations have got to engage with the wider public, also engage with the local MP on these issues, and so I'm sure that her and her constituents will take part in any local engagement as plans move forward. I understand the challenges facing the health economy in South West London have been widely understood for a number of years now, and I recognise and appreciate that the potential changes to local health services are often a cause for great worry and inspire impassioned debate from those involved, and it is time for local partners to work together to find a solution which, as she said, has got to be right for the people of South West London and will secure a sustainable configuration of health services moving forward. And Mr Deputy Speaker, I would like to thank the Honourable Member again for her continued dedication to these health matters.
The Honourable friend would give way.
Of course I will.
I'm grateful for giving way just before she concludes. As the Honourable friend mentioned earlier on about the fact that the consultation might be done after the spending review, I've written to the Secretary of State asking him if he'd consider looking at that again, because with the mayoral election coming up next year, a PERDA period would actually mean that it would be delayed effectively for a whole year. So anything more that can be done to bring it forward would be very helpful.
In the nick of time, Mr Deputy Speaker, he made that point very well, so we will definitely make sure that that is passed on. And in the same spirit, I will take another intervention.
Could I ask the Minister to unequivocally put on the record that any consultation document has to go everywhere or nowhere, and that there must be some consideration of how much things cost? I am amazed that the NHS gets so few people to turn up to events they spend so much money on.
Minister. Makes an excellent point, Mr Deputy Speaker. That always amazes me as well, how few people engage in some of the consultations which are often discussing huge sums of money and affect some really important day-to-day provision of essential care services in their area. So yes, of course, consultation has to go to the whole area, and I've already spoken about how it needs to go beyond the area as well and look at the impact on other local services and those that use them. So she's absolutely right to say that consultation has to be effective, and it has to ask everybody that might be impacted by any changes. And with that in mind, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'd like to thank her again for her continued dedication to her constituents in Mitcham and Morden.
The question is, this House to now adjourn. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order.